Hello and welcome to Reiki Women Podcasts. And today I have with me again the full team of Michaela. Welcome back. Carrie, lovely to see you again. And we're going to have a great discussion today. We started talking before we had to stop because it was starting to get too interesting. So we're going to begin again and continue. So it is about the subject of energy. So it's also a continuation from last week's discussion about what is Reiki as an energy. What is that energy? Is it a specific energy or not? And we're going to take those thoughts that we had last week and we're going to move it into a different discussion that we've all just agreed that we don't have a specific understanding because it's subjective, right? So, but we have, as Michaela said, opinions, and I like opinions. So that's going to be good. Yeah. So we're going to be looking at energy work, other energy work, and the system of Reiki, and having a look at, do they go together? Are they the same thing, not the same thing, or a part of the same thing? Let's see what comes out of this. And I'm going to take the opinionated Michaela first. Go, Michaela.
Is that what I am now? Is I'm
Yes, you are, but it's great.
Yeah, I know, I love it. Yeah, well, we're giggling about that because this is a topic that I think maybe more than any of our other topics really does veer into the realm of like subjectivity and opinion. And I know there's a number of different places of focus that we talked about landing in this conversation. The one that really piqued my curiosity when I listened to your both's conversation from last week was this question of, when we're talking about the specific energy that we're using in the system of Reiki. And I loved, Bronwyn, that you made that distinction so clearly last week, that we use that word Reiki universally sometimes, but we really should take care. Are we talking about the phenomenon, the energy in the world? Are we talking about a system of practice that uses techniques to work with that energy? I love that. So if we're talking about the phenomenon of Reiki, and often defined as universal energy or life energy or spiritual energy, is that the same energy that gets used, applied, worked with in most or all of the energy work modalities that people are involved in? Or are there different energies in the world that are being applied in different systems of practice? And this is a question that has been on my mind for a long time, because I see a lot of conversations in different Reiki forums and groups that we're in, where people are identifying energy as being different types from each other, or the concept that energy is evolving and changing and upgrading, and that techniques need to change. And these sorts of comments always kind of pique my curiosity, and in a way that the feeling is a little bit like, I'm not sure whether I agree with that statement. Right? And so I think this is that place to kind of lean into our experiences with things, and to really ultimately say whatever like mindset works well for an individual is probably the best place for that person to work with, but to be careful about universalizing that opinion and saying this is true, capital T true, right? Mm-hmm. So, just kind of beginning with my, how would I answer that? It's my feeling and my experience and my belief that there is life energy, and that life energy is accessible to all life, including us, and that we have a relationship with the way that energy moves through ourselves and the rest of the world. And the nature of that relationship is going to change a lot depending on, how we focus on it, how we live our life, the choices we make. Do we have a specific practice that focuses our attention on the movement of energy in our body? Those practices span, all cultures, all time, right? There are many, many ways, people develop ways of understanding and working with energy and call it different things. But is it all different energy? And that's where I'm feeling like, for me, the answer is the energy is the same. It's life energy. Our relationship with it is what's different. Our level of engagement with it is different. Our intentions for it is different. The way that we understand it and understand our relationship with it, understand our capabilities with it is different. Our point of focus is different. So that's where I often land, but there's still just this like nagging curiosity of like, there's so much conviction that there are different forms of spiritual energy that are being worked. And I'm just really curious where that comes from and just what other people's opinions are about that. So that is my strong opinion about this subject. And I'd love to hear what the two of you think.
Go, Carrie.
Well, I appreciate all of those thoughts, Michaela, and I knew that you would have so much to add to this conversation. So I'm so grateful that we kind of broke this conversation up a little bit so that we could hear more of about your thoughts. But I think you really point into the, interesting nuances of it, right? Is like, and here's where one of the things that I've been thinking about lately in terms of combining Reiki with other modalities. Are they the same? Are they congruent with one another? Are they totally different? And my thought recently has been, spirituality is ultimately the quest to discover things that are universal, that break through dogma, religion, and point to like this commonality human condition.
Yeah.
And and that are true across, all different types of folks. But that's one of the quests, right, of spirituality. But also spirituality is deeply personal. It's deeply built into and ingrained in our story, each individual story, their own experiences of life and consciousness, and sitting with the mystery of what happens when we die and where do we come from when we're born. All cultures have sat with those questions and maybe come with different rituals, different understandings, different ways to put meaning into something that feels so unknown. And certainly that's the case with energy. There's energy cuts across all different kinds of cultures. There's, this concept of Holy Spirit within Christianity, and within yoga, my beloved tradition of yoga there's this very elaborate, amazing intricacy around prana and what is prana and what is life force, what is this spirit that we breathe, and what's the energy inside of the breath. And so I lean into that quite a bit, this more depth of study around prana, because prana is really interwoven within like the energetics that you tap into within yoga, but it's also interwoven with practice of Ayurveda, which is all about, finding the right balance for your health, your constitution. And much of that is founded on, or the foundation of that is how life energy moves. And so I see a lot of correlations. I see a lot of ways in which that knowledge that I've, sought out helps me as a Reiki practitioner. But one of the big takeaways that I take away from yoga is they have this concept that prana can get confused. And energy can be confusing, right? And just in general, it's like this idea that, water when uncontained, it's chaotic. It doesn't, but when water has a container or a way in which it flows, it's very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So same too with energy, when we add in all of this complexity into energy, and if we don't understand it very well, then I think it leads to this kind of sense of chaos, or energetic chaos. And I think as a Reiki practitioner, I think it's really important for me to feel grounded, centered. But there's been many times, in the work that I do, feeling kind of the opposite of it, feeling scattered, feeling anxious, feeling disconnected. So that's my ultimate why, where I come to in this conversation is like when I see Reiki being combined with other healing modalities, I think that there is a healthy amount of ability to fuse different modalities or add in different knowledge that just gives us a wider lens to understand the nature of energy. But that sometimes it's just too much. And so when we keep adding in, and especially when we don't understand these things very well, it can get really convoluted. And so I've seen Reiki being combined with Kundalini, Kundalini is a really interesting thing, but it has its own roots. It has its own culture that and texts that are all around Kundalini, and it's a very specific experience that might not necessarily mend all the time with Reiki. And so I'm always trying to be really mindful of that. And so that's where I land with that.
I'd love to ask a follow-up question, and I love that you took it in the direction that you just did, and that deep dive that's possible around prana because of the particular scholarship in that area. And again, kind of thinking about the distinction between, the energy as a phenomenon and then whatever system of practice we're using to work with. So if we set aside the system of practice and we set aside culture, meaning the way in which humans have, developed an interaction with that energy inside of that practice, and we set aside history and geography, would you say, Carrie, that Reiki as an energy, a phenomenon, and prana are the same thing with different names and different cultural understandings, or are those two different forms of energy that exist in the world at the same time?
That's a good question. I think that they're, either the same or really similar. I tend to think of prana as more associated with the ki aspect of Reiki. So not this kind of more heavenly or transmission of energy to you. The idea of prana is that it's almost all cultivated within oneself. So, I think that there's absolutely some commonalities, and there's absolutely ways that like deepening your understanding of prana is going to help you understand Reiki better. But there's also ways in which they might not completely equate one to one with one another, and that's okay. And I guess I also associate prana a lot with nature, just being out in nature and really receiving the natural essences of a place. But that's also Reiki too. So
yeah. And you just brought up another interesting distinction, which is there a difference between the energy that's generated from within? So like when we do Jushin Kokyuho and we're bringing our attention to the hara and to the, light there and expanding it outward, that's an internal, focus of energy. Is there a difference between that and the energy that's out here? Right. So universe energy, or the energy that's in the trees, or the energy that's around, or the energy that's in space. Like, are those two different energies? Because that's often what I'm hearing people discuss is, like, don't give, like when you're giving, this is a common one. When you're giving Reiki to somebody, don't give your personal energy to them. You're channeling universal energy through you to them. And so we want to, and oftentimes if somebody's having a difficult time with their Reiki practice, that's something somebody will diagnose, like, well, maybe you're putting your energy into that person, or you're receiving their energy instead of the correct thing, which is to channel universe energy through you and into them. And so that's making a very clear distinction between my internally generated energy, my prana, my Reiki, and something that's outside of myself that's different from me, that I'm going to channel through me, but it's not me. Right. And those are the kinds of things that I'm like, that doesn't feel like it's been my experience, Bronwyn, you've got something.
Oh, I've got a lot to say.
You've got a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I loved, the things that you guys are bringing up, and a lot of the words really interesting. You talk about your mindset, Michaela, like our mindsets, and you're right. It's all subjective, right? So, this is just my opinion, and I have a similar sensation in that I start feeling like that there is a misunderstanding of what what energy is as far as Reiki is concerned. With a lot of the statements that are made, I feel like people haven't really thought about it. That's what it feels like. It's just, it's sort of like, people just being told something and going, oh, right, okay, but not really thinking about, does that make any sense at all? And for me, I'm a very practical person, so I like to have, I like to know the structure, and I like it to make sense. I don't want to be teaching something that doesn't make sense to me. Yeah. So when I remember, the very first thing that I read about the system of Reiki was a book. And I can almost see the very first page still, which is amazing for me. It must have really stood out for me because I'm not terribly visual. And it was, the very first lines of the book were that Reiki is energy work. And it's like prana, it said, like ki, and that was the first thing. And I was like, so it equates to those things. Now, this book, whether right or wrong, once again, yeah, but it did set my mind in a certain direction. And I must say, for years, I've actually heard people say the same thing, that it's prana or ki, or, whatever culture is working, names, what energy is. And I actually think that is probably quite true. And I think that what happens, though, then is sort of what Carrie was saying, is that, things start getting complicated and people start making things more complicated, and it becomes, I think they move away from that idea into something else. And if we look back at what the actual kanji is for Reiki, it's saying that this is the energy of everything. This is the story of the universe, and we are a part of that universe. So if that's the case, then how can I cookie cut out my personal energy and have it as separate to universal energy? So I'm not a part of the universe? I mean, how can we separate ourselves from the universe? I mean, that is this egotistical human attitude to start with. It's the one that says we're not animals, for example. Yep. Yes, we are animals. And we are a part of this universe. There's just no two ways about it. And Joshin Kokyoho proves that in the practice of it. That is the experience of that. As we breathe in the universe. As we breathe out the universe. We are the universe. And actually, we are like a little mirror of the universe. And so we're not something separate. And this idea that, for example, that Reiki is a transmission practice, I don't really see it in that sense, because that's like giving something to someone, which I don't see happening anywhere. Yes, we have Reiju, but that is where we share something. Like it's where our awareness comes up and we're like, oh, wow, I remember this. This is me as a part of everything. And I've been doing all this hard work through my life to separate that, to make myself different, to wear different clothes, to do my hair differently, to think differently, to be different, unique, but actually we're just a part of the whole same big thing, and all those things are fairly, what do you call that? It's just little shallow things. It's not that deep, energetic life that we live. Maybe, we often talk about this Reiki, the word Reiki, meaning something like our true self, who we really are. Yeah. And I was just thinking about it when you guys were talking. You could actually simplify it down to spirituality. It's our spirituality. And, that doesn't clash with anything as far as I can see. It's just who we are. And it is also our experience in the universe. And it is the foundation of of the deeper mystery of the universe.
Yeah.
Once again, it's like we're just like we're like little mirrors of the universe, and then we have all these layers on top that, you know, where we start, you know, when people start working with the energetic practices and they try to make things happen and create things, you know, it's a very external practice then, and that to me doesn't really reflect spirituality. Spirituality for me really is something that wells from inside. And I think it can blend with absolutely I think it is absolutely everything. I don't think there's, you know, this is that other thing that we've spoken about in other podcasts about duality and non-duality. You know, we are creating a very dual experience when we separate all these things out. But I think the essence of the system of Reiki is non-duality. And that is that we are everything and everything is us.
I love that you brought up Reiju, and you touched on that in the last conversation, making that distinction of like, how does this ritual function in the original system? And, you know, when we have a belief system about something, we seek coherence inside of that belief system. And so the kind of misperceptions about the function of Reiju as something, you know, as attunement, something that is the vehicle through which you get access to Reiki, which is a misconception, is actually very coherent with the idea that Reiki universal energy and my personal energy are separate, right? Because I have my personal energy, which is not what I'm going to use to do Reiki. And so I have to be attuned to be able to channel this universal energy. That's very coherent as a belief system.
Yeah, but show me your
It's
personal
not.
energy. Let me cut your personal energy out. Where is it exactly?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, when we interrogate,
or where is it exactly?
When we interrogate it, you know, more carefully, you know, it doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's inconsistent with the belief systems that Reiki came out of, the belief systems of Shinto and esoteric Buddhism in particular. And so, you know, we want to look for coherence, but we also want to look for you know, alignment with belief systems that work for us, right? Because, you know, ultimately we have to, our spirituality is going to be best served by something that feels, you know, coherent for us. And as one of you said, looking for those points of commonality and truth. Sometimes those feel like those are separate things, right? And I don't quite know where the reconciliation is there, but what I do know is that for myself, and by and large for the students that I have been working with for the past 5 years, that concept of the separation between my personal energy and universal energy, and attunement as, you know, a transmission practice, as you said, whereby I don't have access to Reiki until I have had that attunement, did not feel like truth. It didn't feel coherent. It wasn't a set of clothes that fit for me. And working with it in these other ways is a set of clothes that fits. And I hear that over and over again from the people who find their way to me, is like, oh, this feels so much more like what I always believed. This is what, this feels so right inside of me, right? Oh, I feel so much better, like with this, working with this concept that like, it is me, I already have it. I didn't need you to give it to me, but I may need you to teach me some practices and techniques to work with it, right? Again, the system versus the phenomenon. It becomes a very powerful mindset, a very powerful belief system to operate inside of, whether or not somebody out there in the ether could tell us if it's true or not, right? It works. It feels good. It feels empowering. It feels like truth to me. And that's, you know, ultimately what I have to go on.
You know, and I think what this speaks to is also our mind. Mind is so powerful when it comes, you know, we talk about it in yoga, this that your mind can move prana. I think we've talked about it in this podcast. It's the idea that, like, you know, we can move energy with our mind. So, you know, when we have and I think thought, in my experience, thought helps us organize energy.
Mm-hmm.
So whether or not the chakra system is true or not, you know, we can create and formulate this relationship with our own energy and being like, okay, how grounded am I? And I can kind of tune into my legs and my hips, and I can kind of have this sensory, multi-dimensional, multi-sensory awareness of that part of myself, this, and within that chakra system, there's these like universal life questions of how I relate to the earth, and how, and each of us has our own story related to that. Like, how do I relate to creativity? That's something that, maybe you can tap into. So, and when I teach chakras, that's something that I teach, and it's always really illuminating. It's always really interesting. There's always something that I think everyone can take away from that. But it's all just ideas, and the ideas are built on this foundation of energy, and energy can move and dance with us. So, whether or not and my experience of an attunement was really powerful. And now when I look back at it, the words that I can say is that, like, yes, I am myself. I'm the microcosm of a macrocosm, but we lose that connection in our life.
Yeah.
In our day-to-day living, we are so isolated. We drive our cars, we live in our house, we have our little apartment. This is our bank account, all of the things. And so we have this like individuality. And so Reiki can help blur those lines. And my experience now of Reiki is just like clearing that pipe of connecting, that connection between what is my small, unique individual self to the bigger whole. And that was my experience of an attunement. And so I think that speaks to why some people feel like this kind of channeled healing, or this movement of top-down type of energy.
Yeah.
But energy can move in any different way. So it's just, it's important. Like Michaela was saying, is just to not gravitate towards our experiences as capital T truth, but rather to be like, oh, wow, like my mindset really, either like helped me find that experience become more of a reality, or my mindset actually blocked me from experiencing it because I wasn't open to it. And I see a lot of that too in Reiki, is people just like have no idea what Reiki is, and they just are like, I don't even know what that is. I don't even want to go there. So they can't, we can't relate in that sense.
Yeah.
Even though that they are Reiki.
I think, we're too in our heads most of the time anyway with this stuff, don't you reckon? Anyway, but, that's sort of what we're doing here, I guess. But, because a lot of it is semantics, how we say things. And, I could disagree with someone on a semantic thing, but we actually mean the same thing. It can get really difficult to discuss all of this. For example, I don't think we lose a connection. I think we're always connected. We have that interconnectedness. So it's not that we lose the connection, it's that we don't remember that we're connected. So, I know it's semantics, but it does mean that, once again, that it's not dualistic. So, we are, as far as I can perceive, we are all connected, and everything is connected. It's just that we don't, in our minds, see that. So we need to experience that, hence why we do practices. One thing that I thought was interesting was, this idea. I agree, it is subjective, but it does seem to split, I feel like, the ideas about the system of Reiki. They, and how we work with Reiki, and we do seem to sort of be, I don't mean us here, but I think that the Reiki world is sort of a little bit split in some ways, because when I started and I was listening to other people, a lot of people were saying things like, oh yeah, no, I do this because it's more powerful, and I learned this, and this is more or that's a more powerful system than, and to me, those words actually don't work with the system of Reiki. So that makes it difficult then sometimes to even discuss some of this stuff, because if we are all connected, and it's just about our awareness of that, our experience of that being limited or not limited, then, then there is no more powerful, because we all have it.
Right.
So,
We need to learn all the time.
Yeah. So, I mean, learning, 20 new symbols, because they're going to be more powerful for this and that, is actually, in my view, limiting us, because we're actually saying, I am not powerful. Yeah. And I don't have that ability. And I need to make that happen. I need to create, and that's sort of the opposite of what my experience of this is.
Yeah, I mean, I found it, I've shared before my experience of, kind of a typical Western Reiki training to begin with, and then feeling this dissatisfaction, this like, something's not sitting right, and seeking to get right by more and more complex forms of Western Reiki. And, they got more and more new age, and like more and more complex. And as you say, one example, as you say, being adding in a number of additional symbols and mantras that have all, very precise, very specific meanings and applications, kind of like putting together your doctor's kit with all of the different medicines and all of the different tools. And they all have very specific meanings. You have to have everything, very clear. And that made me less effective. It made me feel less connected, less sure of myself, less, much more distracted. I mean, to the point where I had, posters on the wall in my session room, like cheat sheets, like all the things that I would then have to consult, in the middle of a session, because I would forget. And then where am I? Then I'm, in words on the wall, I'm not with this person. I'm not remembering our connection. It took me further and further away. Other people report, as you say, feeling more powerful when they have more tools like that. And, I'm like, I ask myself, like, who am I to tell them that they're not? That's their experience. That's what they're feeling. Their relationship with these tools is obviously different than mine is. I can invite them into a different way of thinking about it. And if that resonates with them, if they're experiencing some kind of dissatisfaction, then they may be curious. But, I say this almost as a reminder to myself, because I definitely go through periods of being a little bit judgmental or a little bit dogmatic about, views that are different than mine. And then I have to remind myself, I don't want anybody to be judgmental about views that are different than theirs, right? I want us to be in curious conversation with each other about things that matter, and to, be true to our way in terms of finding that system that feels true for us, honoring those systems, being true to the way of the cultures that made the systems, and then being true to my being, which I believe, to be a very, very simple matter of, oneness with all of the life that's around us. And that mindset has been serving me much better as I enter into these conversations with others, or even just witness them. I actually don't enter those conversations very often. I'm like, I don't actually have much to say to this question you've asked about, these dynamics, and just letting that be okay. Like, you have a different belief system, a different experience with this than I do. And, yeah, just staying curious is really what I'm looking for. Now that I have found a system where that feels like a comfortable set of clothes, right? I don't have the like, something's not right, feeling anymore. So I feel much more relaxed about other folks' perspectives.
Just before you say something, Carrie, I just want to say I really appreciate that, Michaela. And yeah, I don't go there at all. I'm not on forums. I can't do any of that, because it's just, I don't want to argue about it either. But, there is a sense in me what feels right as well, and what works for me. I think it would be really interesting, and maybe in the next podcast, if we have a little chat about the future of the system of Reiki, because it sort of leads on from this, in the sense of identifying that there are a lot of different, very diverse ideas about even what Reiki is and what the system of Reiki is. So it would be interesting to have a chat about where we think that might all head.
Definitely.
Yeah, so I think that we should definitely have a conversation around that. And kind of coming back to our conversation today, I think what you said, Bronwyn, is so important, and it's so key to recognize how ego can kind of pervade, our experiences, like of not only just energy, but also like putting hierarchy around who does it better and why. And so this whole idea of like being more powerful, like to me, that just automatically brings up this idea of hierarchy and expectation. So like, is the best healing a really powerful healing, or is it the best healing the one that brings you more in balance and feels more like yourself again? Like so all those words just really don't help me. And as a Reiki practitioner, I feel like I've butted up against this so many times with my clients who come to me and they'd be like, I just want the powerful healing energy, give me this amazing psychic, like transcendental experience where like I go to Mars and back, and like, I need to do that, and I'm like, okay, that's a lot of pressure on me. And I don't even want to take you to Mars and back, like, and I think it hits women so hard too, that women, we do not lend our ear to other women who are developing themselves outside of traditional systems, even within systems. I've been reading up a lot more on imposter syndrome and how it disproportionately affects so much more women. And it's really about not getting the recognition that you deserve for who you are. And so I think that sometimes happens with clients as they come to us expecting so much, and then not having those expectations met because it's just too much to be putting on somebody else, and then them being like, oh, that person probably just wasn't a powerful healer. That's something that really irks me. And I think it speaks too to this reason why people bring so many modalities together within the concept of energy and within the concept of Reiki, is because, well, first of all, there's this whole thing of, if you do feel drawn or called to, being a Reiki practitioner or an energy practitioner, is that you have to know a lot. You have to develop yourself not only as a Reiki practitioner, but it is helpful to have maybe something else that you're also developing that gives you some sort of contrast that, helps you, like, oh, well, like, I mean, like, I use it all the time. Oh, well, yoga speaks to this in a way that really helps me understand something that Reiki maybe does speak to, or it doesn't, or I see some commonalities, I see differences. All of that helps my brain learn and grow. And there's also this challenge of just making a living as a practitioner, so it might require one to develop different certificates, to take on different trainings, to learn different skills. And I do that all the time, but I also know that there's a limit, like where when we just start trying to collect as many certifications as we possibly can, that there's something underneath that of insecurity, of not feeling like you can be who you are. To own your knowledge and to be the best, and to offer your own unique perspective. Each of us as practitioners, we offer our own unique perspective. It doesn't work for everybody necessarily, but for the people it really resonates to, it's life-changing. And so, anyways, that's my thought, is this, that sometimes when I see people out there being like, oh, I've studied Kundalini Reiki and Sikam Reiki, and I like tarot card reading, and and I think that that's all lovely, but it just starts to like amplify this feeling of not enoughness, not only just like within the practice of Reiki, but also just for the practitioner. So I think we always have to be really mindful and really selective about what we're studying and why, and how that fills our toolkit as practitioners to support our clients better.
I think you're bringing up something that's so important, Carrie, and so important, and that could possibly should be its own discussion. But this need for us to be self-reflective, self-responsible, and discerning about that impulse to layer on the different practices, because we might be doing that for very different reasons. And some of which could be really in great service of our growth, and others that are absolutely a reflection of, you know, a internal feeling of not enough, never enough. I need, you know, I will not be enough until I have all of the things. And so I'm going to keep bringing all the things. And it's also a reflection of a deeply entrenched capitalist mindset that we have to have all of the credentials in order so that we can be as successful as possible, instead of trusting ourselves to go broad and deep with something that really matters to us. And so, you know, when I talk about this with students, you know, I talk about, first and foremost, whatever modality it is that we feel called to study for whatever reason, we must stay in integrity with that modality and learn it in and of itself, learn itself, where it came from, why it is the way it is, what the elements mean, as much as we can know from its original context. And do those things actually resonate with me, or do they just seem cool or, you know, exotic or interesting or artistic? And then asking that question of, why do I feel drawn to this? Is it because there's something about this practice that is really just really that good fit for me, right? That comfortable set of clothes like includes this piece also. Is it because it's connected to our own lineage, or is it some of these other reasons? And blending modalities is not in and of itself a bad thing or a wrong thing to do. It's about, what is our motivation, and do we feel grounded, settled, related, and connected to the practices that we're doing? Because I've talked to a number of people who, oh yeah, I'm a Reiki master, but I don't usually use it, or I have all of these other things. It's like, then you're not actually in relationship with your Reiki practice, right? You didn't spend the time to develop that relationship before jumping into the next thing, or perhaps Reiki is really not the thing that really serves your soul to begin with. And it matters what the differences are for each individual person. Another piece that I always find valuable for myself and to share with others, and that I build into the classes that I teach, is connecting with parts as much as we can from our own lineages, our own families, and finding those points of commonalities between whatever modality it is we're studying that is not from our own lineage. So of course, in this case, Reiki. And there's a lot of really fertile, beautiful, you know, things that happen when we feel into those authentic connections from a place of true understanding of all of them. And so, for example, I find it really, you know, it helps my Reiki to think about the nature-based elements that come through Shinto about Reiki, and to think about them in terms of indigenous Celtic practice, which is my lineage, right? Because there's so much commonality between the way that the Celts related to the natural world and the way that Shinto practitioners relate to the natural world. And so that's a really natural place of blending, where I understand those two perspectives really well, and I'm leaning into those places of overlap, so that, you know, a little piece of me and my lineage is there alongside of, you know, these universal kind of perspectives. And so, yeah, I think asking ourselves that question, asking of each other, right? So some community integrity, right? If we notice somebody, or we notice ourselves with this impulse to collect modalities, where is that coming from? What is that about? And what is your relationship, your active relationship with the modalities you already have?
Yeah. Look, I 100% agree with everything. You said some really beautiful things. You know, the Dalai Lama said, when, you know, he's got Western students coming to him and they're like, oh, you know, I want to be a Buddhist. I want to learn, you know, this amazing practice that you do. And he's like, why would you become Buddhist? Don't you have your own like religion, practice, whatever, you know? And what he's saying there is exactly what you just said. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to, that they couldn't become Buddhists, but he's saying, surely you need to delve into who you are, where you come from, what that is. And honestly, that's a really difficult thing for many of us because, the way that we've moved around the world, and, I come from Australia. We're like the US in that sense, a melting pot of different cultures, and, we're all a mix of all these different things. And it can be really difficult to actually sense that connection back through our, parental lineage. So, uh, I think there are a lot of us are adrift. Actually, I just saw in Australia the census. We do a census every so many years, and the results of that, and they only had, well, it was the level of people that said that they were atheists, for example. I know it's about religion, but it's just enormous here in Australia. It's it could be, I don't know, 30-40%. It was a really high amount of people that consider themselves non-religious, that have moved away from religion. And religion was a thing that sort of kept us together in our communities. And so, there is a lot of searching and looking and not really knowing what our roots are. And, I feel that definitely relates to me. And I found that the system of Reiki has really filled a space for me in helping me to understand the world a little better, and my place in it. I really do. It's been the most amazing, wonderful thing. So, without too much dogma, thank God. So, yeah. I loved what you said about going broad and deep, those words, broad and deep, into your practice. And that's where I know Carrie and I have spoken about this before, like you could have all these different Reiki practices. For example, you could say, oh, I'm this Reiki practitioner and that Reiki practitioner and that Reiki practitioner. But to me, that doesn't go to those words, broad and deep, because I couldn't do it. I couldn't actually give a different history. Like, how could I teach something and say, oh yeah, this is the history, and then I teach it under the system of Reiki under a different name and say, oh, well, actually, no, this is the history. I mean, where is my truth and integrity? And oh, Reiki means this. And then I teach it oh no, Reiki means this. I mean, it doesn't make sense. I think, finding for yourself a truth, and whatever that truth is, but, going to that truth and fully being present in that practice and integrating it into your life and doing all those wonderful things that a practice like the system of Reiki offers us is a wonderful thing. And we do need to look at our own personal truths and what we think that we're actually doing. I don't think teaching a whole bunch of stuff that's just very shallow and does not reflect a personal practice.
Indeed.
Yeah, it's amazing how when you can present a practice over and over again, there is that depth, that relationship that you can develop, not just also for yourself, but for whoever you're teaching. I think that's really important. And then people start to feel like they can be themselves in that practice. They can come home to that practice. I think of even just there's a type of yoga. Well, it's Bikram yoga, there's a complication about that, but there's this hot yoga, or this idea that just to do the same poses over and over again, and they're good, they're going to stretch you out and strengthen you in all the different places. And there's something very relaxing about entering that kind of practice where you know what's coming and you know what to expect, and you can just deepen into a more meditative movement meditation. So, well, I think it's so important to remember that, especially as teachers. It's what's our experience, not only for ourselves, but also for whoever we're giving this practice to.
Because we need to teach from our experience, not from some book or, right? Yeah, I think that brings us around to the end of today, don't you?
Yeah, totally.
Feels like a good note to end on.
Yeah. So, look, what we're doing here is exactly what we're talking about, is trying to, find find truths and you know, broaden and deepen our practices. And we hope that for those of you listening, that this also broadens and deepens your practice, whatever that practice is. Yeah. So we look forward to seeing you at the next exciting Reiki Women podcast. See you later, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.